Welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast, the show that empowers gay men to live their fullest, healthiest lives. Whether you're navigating relationships, mental health, intimacy, finances, career, or personal growth, Ken Howard, a licensed clinical social worker in California, certified psychiatric social worker, and ASEC certified sex therapist, is here to guide you with over 30 years of experience, specializing in gay male individuals, couples, and polycules. As the founder of GayTherapyLA.com and GayCoachingLA.com. And now, today's episode.
Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I'd like to talk about legal essentials for gay men, protecting your future. Having been a specialist therapist for gay men for over 32 years in 2025, I've seen individuals and couples and adult gay men in polyamory, like polycules, in all kinds of life situations at all ages. Primarily, I'm a psychotherapist helping gay men with the usual mental health concerns such as depression, anxiety, OCD, ADHD, gay relationship challenges, issues regarding gay men's sexuality as a ASEC certified sex therapist, substance abuse recovery, career counseling, family dynamics, PTSD. I'm also someone who specializes in gay men in broader ways, such as for things like executive coaching or sometimes other kinds of coaching like career counseling. So I also have this, separate life, career, relationship coaching to gay men all over the world. And I draw some of my skills in this from having been a case manager in social work early in my career in nonprofit organizations in Los Angeles County. And that was in my capacity as still a clinical psychiatric social worker, but helping guys more with very practical things in some nonprofit agencies, including homeless folks. I guess we say unhoused now, excuse me. But guys who were dealing with multiple stressors, including things like housing and just general life management, a basic income, and the basics of living. And that's how I kind of got my start, in addition to counseling gay men even back then. So sometimes it's about, psychotherapy and various practical techniques of doing that for either individuals or couples or polycules or groups or families. But sometimes it is about a real practical problem solving. And that's something that a clinical social worker might do that an LMFT might not, or an LPCC, or certainly a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Social work can sometimes be more about the practical in super behavioral terms, particularly in things like nonprofit organizations or community-based agencies. But it can also be in a private practice setting as well, if the provider is trained and willing to do that, and that's the kind of help that the client wants. So occasionally, I see gay men facing life challenges related to the law and legal procedures. A previous episode talked about that, about how to manage the anxiety of going through a legal procedure to help you be a good witness on a deposition or on a witness stand or something like that. And that episode was about supporting gay men going through that litigation process. And, there is a time and function for the therapist in addition to the work gay men do with their attorney in pursuing a legal case. Therapy for gay men enduring the challenges of litigation or legal proceedings, that might help them cope with the stress and anxiety of preparing their case and undergoing the interpersonally arduous experience of giving a deposition testimony or taking the stand in court, especially under cross-examination from the opposing counsel, where they get to take a turn at questioning you, sometimes very aggressively, because they're trying to defend their position on behalf of their client, just as your attorney would be trying to represent and advocate for you. A similar situation involving some legal topics and their related heightened emotions can be in a gay male relationship when the partners or spouses are considering common legal documents in life, that many cohabitating or married couples face. These might include making a will, establishing a legal trust with their belongings and assets, determining power of attorney in case of emergency death or incapacitation, planning for one another's last wishes, what you want to happen at and just after your death, determining the kinds and levels of coverage for various types of insurance, life insurance, homeowners insurance, car insurance, maybe insurance for collectibles or musical instruments, how to be aware of one's rights in the workplace, where gay men can often face illegal discrimination or harassment, in a wedding or marriage, those legal documents, and how to legally manage your tax obligations efficiently. So again, while a lawyer or an attorney would help anyone with these topics, including gay men and gay male couples or polycules, there are mental health and emotional aspects of these life management topics that the attorney might only minimally discuss. Many legal procedures and documents are the product of heartfelt, candid, and compassionate discussions about one another's values first, on how to protect each other now and for the future as you enjoy your lives together day to day. So there's some urgency to take action. Gay relationships are, like so many people, vulnerable to what can happen if the partners involved do not do the work of attending to their legal arrangements and documents. Years ago, I had a funny and charming friend who was an attorney himself. But while on a vacation, he became suddenly ill with a previously undiagnosed congenital condition, and he passed away. And he left his partner alone in their home, and unfortunately, he did not have a will. So my friend's very conservative, anti-gay parents basically swooped in after their son's death and laid claim to all of his belongings and assets, including the clothes, the furniture, the appliances, and certainly bank accounts and life insurance and death benefits from his job as an attorney in the corporate world. The poor partner was left completely unprotected and at the mercy of his cruel and dismissive in-laws, who didn't recognize their relationship or care about the well-being of my friend's now widower, and this was in the days before marriage equality. This terrible situation was a cautionary tale about what can happen in gay male relationships if a partner becomes incapacitated or dies without having had proper legal plans and protections and documents completed beforehand. In other words, as soon as possible. These kinds of considerations, in relationships are very easy to ignore. They are boring, tedious, unpleasant, and outright macabre topics to discuss and deal with, like death or disability. They're downer topics, and it's only human nature for gay men to avoid pain and seek pleasure, like all humans do, like all the animal kingdom does, like any other human or member of the animal kingdom. But there's a paradox here. The more gay male partners in relationships take some time, which is not as much as you might think, to discuss their values and wishes and make plans and document their wishes legally in the short term, the more they don't have to worry about it in the long term, with hopefully a nice long time before anything happens in their lives where these legal arrangements would become relevant, sometimes very urgently relevant. So with all of these, I'm going to ask you to do a little reflection exercise on each section of topics today. So I want you to reflect on any personal experiences or stories that you've encountered where the absence of legal planning led to challenges or hardship or even disaster. So how did these situations influence your perspective on proactive legal arrangements? Does it make you more interested in taking a more proactive approach to legal arrangements? Maybe so. Let's talk about coping with the macabre and avoiding avoidance. I'm particularly interested, just as a person, in the concept of lifelong learning and continuous personal growth as one element that contributes to your overall quality of life. I consider it a kind of wealth and life abundance to learn from others in friendships, in working relationships, in family relationships, and even in self-help books or seminars. And of course, in therapy and coaching, let's hope. But I learned the importance of taking these kind of boring steps to protect the self legally. It's not easy to embrace talking about some of these things. These considerations in life that have an association to formal legal documents are often sad, macabre topics that most of us would rather not talk about, like death or dismemberment or incapacitation, something that might be the conversation over dinner with the Addams family or the Munsters or the Beetlejuice afterlife waiting room. But with my story earlier about my friend who died without a will and caused a hardship for his widower, these situations demand some brief, focused, careful attention to take care of. And then you can put it all aside and forget about it until the time it's needed, if ever. I've had attorneys or friends tell me that the most basic of wills can withstand legal challenge, such as one story one attorney told a friend of his who was dying of AIDS back in the 90s and wrote on the back of a matchbook, "My partner, so-and-so, gets everything I own." And he signed it and dated it, and despite being challenged by the guy's family when he did pass away, the partner won. And it was that simple. And of course, more formal wills guided by an attorney, or at least a good legal document service online, are even better. It's kind of a hierarchy to how watertight wills can be, or how easy they can be to deal with. The more sophisticated and probably the more expensive, the better. When you're in a gay relationship and you all know that you need to address this stuff, you just have to steel your nerve and validate that while macabre topics are emotionally difficult to discuss, that's the price that one pays to be on the other side of these discussions and arrangements and procedures. And that's the peace of mind that comes with knowing that you were well protected in the event of loss or hardship. It's cruel in the short term to be kind in the long term. It's kind of like the gym, no pain, no gain. And you don't have to tackle all of these legal and emotional chores at once. I would consider each of them, as most or all relationships do or should, on some kind of administrative to-do list in your house. And go through them at your own pace with your partner or partners and make steady progress down the list to have your relationship on solid ground now and for the future. For example, you might tackle one topic every other Saturday until they're done, something like that. Manageable, steady progress that's better than nothing and, avoiding it all just indefinitely, just putting it off and putting it off. Putting things off and not valuing it leaves you wide open and vulnerable if something bad were to happen. So I'd like to take you through the list of topics that you and your partner or spouse might consider to cultivate that lifelong peace of mind, the reduction in anxiety, that sense of peace and tranquility and security that strong and healthy relationships strive for. So let's do another reflection. Consider your own comfort level when discussing topics like wills and medical directives. What steps can you take to initiate these essential conversations with your partner in a way that aligns with your shared values? So, in no particular order, here are some considerations of how to protect yourself and each other in various situations that just modern life can bring. First, notice what I call the Saturday story, the final resting place. So the way my husband and I did it, I've been with my husband for 23 years coming up in May in 2025. And we did this all a number of years ago. And, the way we did it is not the only way it could be done, but it might help you to kind of structure it. And that's to set aside some time, such as a weekend morning or afternoon. We did a Saturday morning to talk about completing important legal documents. Now, we use something called LegalZoom.com, Zoom, like Zoom In, and LegalZoom.com. And then later we used something called TrustandWill.com for ours. And these are legal document services that exist online, where you purchase the documents and their services for a fee. There are others, but we did LegalZoom and Trust and Will. And while these are not ideal, because many attorneys just cringe when people use these services, but sometimes that's your only option if you just can't afford an expensive attorney services to write our respective wills, and we did a trust for our home and vehicles and bank accounts. We also used this when I was working with my elderly mother on power of attorney for her medical care and estate, which is critical if you have adult caregiving responsibility for elderly parents, which, I also did an episode on gay men taking care of elderly parents. You might want to look for that if you haven't heard that one already. And my husband and I had previous discussions, often on weekends at a relaxed, non-rushed, private time at home to just chat about our values and wishes, which involved our personal feelings and some of our family history and traditions, our cultural influences. I'm basically very long-term, old school, before the Revolution, American and English, and my husband is English and Irish, so we're very Anglo family history and cultural influenced. But we also just discussed our personal philosophies, just how as individuals we feel about certain existential topics in this area. And then we prepared the documents online, and we had a traveling notary public come over to our home for the signing and stamping that's required on all formal documents to verify your identity, including giving a thumbprint at the time of signing them to authenticate that we really did sign them. It's proof of you are who you are by taking that thumbprint. And we had the next door neighbors over, this very nice, friendly, straight Latino couple, for coffee and cake to be our witnesses and to sign a bunch of documents with us. You needed a witness for the notarization, and they agreed to serve in that role. After the documents were all signed and notarized and our little coffee clutch was over, we put the documents in a fireproof box for storage and have rarely even thought about them in the years since. And, the nice couple next door moved away, and their property was bought by a corporation who uses it as an illegal Airbnb, which was a real loss. We also sent copies out. We copied everything that were the notarized documents, and I sent a copy to my sister on the East Coast, and my husband sent a copy to his sister on the East Coast. So our sisters are kind of our proxy. If we, God forbid, if we go down in the same plane or something, our sisters know what to do. So, if we had, God forbid, a terrible fire like they had in the Palisades recently in Los Angeles, a strong box, unfortunately, is not going to withstand a 2,000-degree fire like that. Those were. They can help, but you also need off-site storage for important documents, or even important things like keys and things like that. If you don't want things on your premises, you want to back up. You could also store things, a PDF that is signed and notarized. Sometimes, copies like that don't measure up because they need a wet signature that's original, but most legal proceedings will allow a photocopy or a scan to have the same weight as the original, because you can only have one original, right? So storing things off-site is just an added little tip. But what preceded all of this was a discussion between my husband and me about our feelings about different kinds of emergency situations. We wanted to ask each other and share with each other what our feelings were about different things that theoretically come up, and that do come up for some people every year. And we talked about whether we wanted a traditional burial in a cemetery or cremation, or other legal options like burial at sea. I was sentimental about wanting burial near some deceased relatives at a cemetery in Glendale, California, where my great aunt, the actress Esther Howard, and my great grandmother, the opera singer Martha E. Howard, and many famous people were interred. L. Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz, and different actors from the movie of The Wizard of Oz are interred at that cemetery. So one day, another Saturday, we met with what they call a pre-need counselor. Isn't that funny? It's a euphemism for a sales rep for a cemetery. And we actually bought property, that we paid off in little payments over a number of years. And it was there in that plot where I could be buried and my husband's cremated ashes could be interred. Assuming that we don't pass away in some other way where a body is not recoverable. We talked about our family history and our thoughts about the environment and what might give us peace of mind about all that when the time comes. Hopefully not for a nice long time, but we were talking about when the time does come for one of us to pass away or both. And after all that, we put it aside to refocus more importantly on living our lives in the first place. So let's reflect. Have you and your partner discussed your preferences for your final arrangements, burial, cremation, burial at sea, whatever? What cultural or familial or personal beliefs would influence your decisions about your final resting place? Have you ever given that thought and maybe how you're influenced? Let's talk about another topic, advanced directives. So both my husband and I have had health scares, more than one. We've had experiences with the medical system, such as doctors' offices and hospitals, and even a near-death experience for me from a severe leg infection in 2021. I think I did an episode on that too, about personal crisis. And hospitals are places where people receive medical care, but they are nothing if not drastically connected to legal procedures, such as, consent to receive services, which therapists also deal with. We have to have your consent to treat you. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, the Congressional Act HIPAA, which governs the confidential storage and disclosure of medical records, risk management, standardization of procedures. Where I live in Los Angeles, the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center is a prestigious medical center, but oh boy, they cover their butt with all kinds of tedious procedures because they don't want to get sued, because they probably have been for all kinds of things. Now, there are legal implications for all of this, including the hospital keeping records of what your stated wishes are in the case of an emergency, like being in a coma or otherwise unconscious and unable to speak or communicate. We talked about what we would like the other person to do if we were incapacitated. The classic pull the plug discussion, especially after tragic or horrific stories in the news about people like Terry Schiavo years ago, whose husband wanted to pull the plug according to what he knew of her wishes about what to do if she became incapacitated, which she did, versus her conservative religious parents who wanted her to be kept alive artificially indefinitely. And it became a raging and impassioned national controversy in the media that sparked the most histrionic behaviors from people who never even knew that family, not unlike anti-choice activists, and frighteningly scary public protests on the right to life versus the right to death with dignity. Now, we didn't want to get us anywhere near that kind of family or societal conflict. So we discussed our contingency wishes and documented them well. So there was no question on what to do if that should happen to one of us. We also discussed what to do if one of us predeceases one another, who dies first. Not only what we want done with our bodies, like the burial or cremation or donation to science, but also how to manage whatever money or material assets we leave behind. We primarily focused on how the surviving partner could be provided for, like paying our mortgage, which we share, but we also discussed in our respective families of origin or charitable organizations we were interested in supporting if ultimately our estates were large enough to kind of go around like that. And we talked about any concerns that we would have about who might need our stuff or our money if we were to pass away and, the other partner was taken care of. So let's do a reflection on this. Think about a medical emergency that you've either witnessed or heard about. How did the presence or absence of advance directives impact that situation? What preferences about emergency medical things would you want clearly documented for yourself? What would you want other people to do if you were in an emergency like that? Let's talk about financial and asset considerations. It wasn't just what to do in the event of death or incapacitation. It was also how to protect each other in other ways, such as designated each other as the beneficiaries, or what they call payable on death, with our investment accounts, such as Charles Schwab, Fidelity, Vanguard, Ameriprise, whatever, our bank accounts or other assets, and documenting our wishes to make it clear who gets what and how much, such as dividing assets in certain percentages to our surviving beneficiaries and our family or friends, not only with each other, but, to nieces or nephews or siblings who survive us. And this would be applicable whether an estate is large or medium or just includes a few belongings or bank accounts. So I encourage all of my clients to delve into financial literacy. Many people think that having a certified financial planner or a retirement account or at a big brokerage firm is only for wealthy people, but that's not true. These days, these brokerage websites are easier than ever to use and to open with a relatively small nest egg. I've also worked with guys with quite large estates, and their finances are especially complex when it comes to their last wishes. And this is why legal state and nationwide marriage equality was so important, because federal law and the laws of various states protect surviving spouses with literally thousands of automatic legal rights. But some things need specific discussion and documentation. People forget that marriage equality is not just a heartfelt and romantic notion about people in love. It also has enormous and far-reaching legal complications. Remember, the Supreme Court case in the United States that gave us nationwide marriage equality was really about a lesbian widow who didn't want to have to pay extra inheritance tax that a straight widow wouldn't have to pay. So it was important from a legal protection standpoint for same-sex and opposite-sex partners in marriages to have equal legal civil rights. So we also discussed how to get legal advice to protect ourselves and each other from any kind of trouble, such as one of us passing away, like what happened with my friend, and relatives coming forward to challenge the wishes of our estate. Years ago, we were advised by a very gay-savvy attorney that gay male couples who can't think of any anticipated trouble from family members who might challenge their will or lay a claim to things sometimes find that the people who challenge them come out of the woodwork, especially where money is concerned. And that can make things dramatic and irrational very quickly and create a bitter family drama. He told us it's not even things like siblings, it's the spouses of siblings who can cause trouble and egg on their spouses to grab whatever they can from their loved one's estate, sometimes even if they were estranged. Especially in gay relationships, from people who do not understand, like, or respect the rights of surviving gay partners in general, or they just didn't like their sibling's spouse or partner in the first place. He advised that we cannot be too careful or take anything on faith. It has to be in writing in ways that would pass legal muster and pass legal challenge. And the legal language needs to be very specific to withstand potential challenge down the line in order for what you want to have happen to actually happen. So let's reflect. Evaluate your current financial arrangements. How confident are you that your assets would be managed according to your wishes in unforeseen circumstances? What steps can you take to ensure this? Who are the people you think would be allies and who might challenge things and cause trouble? Do you feel confident you've designated a beneficiary for your 401k or similar benefits at work in the event of your death or incapacitation? Are you even aware of your 401k at work if you have one, or a 403b plan if you're in a nonprofit? Have you bothered to fill out the form that says who is the beneficiary of your benefits if something should happen to you? That would be something to do at work if you haven't done that already. Let's talk about medical emergencies. If a medical emergency were to arise in your relationship, do you have documentation such as copies of a state marriage license or certificate of a state registered domestic partnership, or signed HIPAA forms that would allow a partner or a spouse very quick access to your doctors and nurses and other staff at a hospital, especially if you were traveling in a red state or a foreign country that would likely have people working there who practically they get off on putting up barriers to same-sex partners that they don't recognize because they don't like same-sex relationships. So they're going to make things difficult to act out their antipathy and their hate. There are people who do that, like that clerk in Kentucky or whatever, who wouldn't sign the marriage license because she was just, didn't like gay couples. So having documentation about your relationship and legal access to protected health information, like signing the HIPAA forms, that's critical. So let's reflect. Recall a time when someone faced a medical emergency. Were their loved ones able to make decisions on their behalf? What legal documents could have facilitated that process for you and your partner? Let's talk about weddings and prenuptial agreements. So even though I'm not an attorney, I have sometimes worked with gay male couples in premarital counseling, including whether or not to have a prenuptial agreement, and if so, what that would specify and why. One gay couple that I worked with had a very hard time working through that, as one partner wanted to have a prenuptial agreement to protect the assets that he had accumulated before the relationships, because he had many, many friends who advised him you would be crazy to approach marriage without a prenup, and he thought the same. But the other partner had had family of origin hardship and found the concept of a prenuptial agreement very triggering and cynical and unromantic. So with work in their couples therapy, they worked through it, somewhat painstakingly, to explore both the current situation and the underlying emotional dynamics. And they ultimately came to an agreement. And then once they discussed what they really thought would be fair and what that agreement would kind of look like, that they could both buy into, then they hired their respective attorneys, one for each of them, to write it up in legalese language. And they had to really set limits with the attorneys who wanted to encourage them to alter their agreement for, to their benefit. Hey, you can get much more out of this. And they said, no, we've talked it out and we're clear on what we want to do. And they just needed the attorneys to formalize it. And then they had a happy wedding, and they've had a very robust life ever since. So situations like this illustrate the multidisciplinary team approach of how professionals like a gay couples therapist and then attorneys might support gay men as individuals or in relationships. Let's reflect. When the topic of prenuptial agreement gets mentioned, do you see this as a pragmatic protection or as an unromantic buzzkill? What do you feel is important to clarify before you married someone? Let's talk about wills. Preparing the very formal and legal document of a will is an especially important experience that covers both the logistical and legal and the emotional. A will is sometimes viewed as a postscript to one's life, and it can feel like a psychological defense against our own sense of mortality. When we provide for others who survive us after we depart, let's say, we are providing for a legacy that has impact beyond our own lifetimes. It can feel like a form of immortality and cheating death a little bit. My heart will go on and all that. And many say, who cares? You'll be dead. But doing this can be important to have peace of mind while you're still alive, and can take the sharp edges off the macabre idea that we're all going to die someday. A will is a way to summarize our life experience and support our values beyond what we earn and collect and do in our lifetime. Most wills between partners and spouses are about taking care of the one we leave behind, helping them to be financially, relatively more secure for the rest of their lives, and to help them if they should need things like expensive long-term medical care in their own twilight years. If that's pretty much taken care of, and that all depends on one's assets and overall socioeconomic status, then there can be a discussion of if you leave money to other people or institutions, like your alma mater or other schools or charitable organization that reflect the values that you supported in life. LGBT rights, the environment, animal welfare, political causes, scientific research, the arts, historical entities, whatever. Wills are not just about the money you leave behind, but also your stuff, your belongings. Gay men are stereotyped to have good taste in things, and so we might collect things in our lifetimes that have artistic or historical value, and we might want to know in our lifetime what might happen to our stuff, like collectibles or works of art or souvenirs or family heirlooms, antiques, that might have both a sentimental and a commercial value. Wills also provide instructions about wishes on what happens to pets or kids if we have them. Straight people can have these same considerations too, but for gay men, we might have additional considerations, such as wanting any children we leave behind to be raised by surviving step-parents or foster parents that instill progressive values about LGBT people, or prevent them from going to schools that indoctrinate students with religious bigotry. We might have feelings about the attitudes of the people that would raise our children if we were no longer here to do it. Even things like pets, we would want to feel like we were directing our pets, if they survive us, to be going to a good home and be somehow provided for. Let's reflect. Consider the legacy that you want to leave behind. How do your possessions and your assets reflect your life's journey, and how would you like them distributed to honor your relationships and values after you're gone? Now let's talk about insurances. Even besides death, legal protections in gay male relationships include how to protect ourselves and each other by purchasing and carrying various forms of insurance that would help mitigate damage or loss and provide adaptive coping in the event of some catastrophic event. It can be challenging, though, to balance wanting to have a reasonable household budget for things to do to enjoy in life while we're alive and well, but also to purchase coverage if mishaps should befall us. Insurances for things like disability benefits if we somehow couldn't work anymore, life insurance to protect our partner or partners to maybe live in the same house or with the same lifestyle if we weren't around anymore to contribute from our income, adequate medical coverage for the best care available and access to good hospitals if we needed, long-term care insurance if we needed professional caregiver assistance when we're very much still alive but in need of elderly care, home insurance against things like theft, burglary, fire or flood or earthquake like us in California, and home or vehicle insurance to protect our everyday stuff that would be hard to live without. The recent firestorms in Los Angeles illustrate dramatically the importance of adequate levels of coverage against fire or flood. With the prevalence of crime, we have to protect against losses if someone should take something from us. With urban traffic or even suburban or rural traffic, vehicle insurance is critical and often required by law in most states to repair or replace our vehicle or protect us if we should be found liable in an accident. Sometimes I think if I didn't spend so much of our household budget on various kinds of insurance premiums throughout the year, there would be more money available to just enjoy life during normal times. But the adage about insurance is that you don't need it until you need it, and then you're glad that you have it. So insurance can preserve your quality of life and your standard of living in the event of great loss. And you have to balance the cost of the premiums to have coverage and the level of coverage versus taking your chances. I think too many guys kind of take their chances too much, and they just better hope nothing bad ever happens if they're underinsured. But I've heard the adage to buy all of the insurance that you can reasonably afford. Look at what you can reasonably afford, and if you can carry more types of insurance or higher levels of coverage or a lower deductible or whatever on these plans, then do it, but build that peace of mind to protect yourself, because as we learned in Los Angeles with the firestorms, things can happen. Let's reflect. How do you see yourself balancing having money to spend to enjoy your daily life versus paying insurance premiums to cover losses in an emergency that may or may not happen? Which type of insurance coverage or plans are the most important for you in your value system, in your life? How can you and your partner decide how to allocate your insurance premiums budget, such as the type of insurance, the vendor who sells it or the company, the insurance company, the levels of coverage, and the amount of any deductibles? Let's talk about legal protections to protect from political changes. In the days before marriage equality, gay male relationships had to devise ways legally to protect their partners without the benefit of marriage laws on the books. Gay men might have engaged in marriage-like civil unions or domestic partnership opportunities. That was that whole era before marriage equality of separate but equal. And we said during the initial civil rights fight, separate but equal is inherently unequal, which is why we fought for full marriage equality. And we're still fighting for it, because there's cases now in 2025 where they're trying to get the Supreme Court to reverse it and do what they did with abortion and, leave it to the states. So a conservative state might outlaw abortion or outlaw same-sex marriage, and a progressive state might allow them. Right now, it's nationwide, but that could change if the Supreme Court and the government takes an even further move to the right, suppressing LGBT rights. Sometimes, but before we had that, gay men in relationships would just have some kind of domestic contract designed to protect one another, just as two people off the street entering into a legal agreement as a contract. During the height of the AIDS crisis, gay men sometimes even adopted their partners, like someone might adopt a child, but they established legal protection and rights of survivorship that way. So during the marriage equality debates and controversy, there was some anti-gay Republican politician in Congress or in some state government who wanted to not only ban same-sex marriage, but also domestic partnerships, civil unions, and even private contracts that somehow mutually benefit and protect same-sex, especially gay male partners. Because in their virulent hate, they wanted to punish same-sex couples through every means that they could think of in their sadistic mission to see same-sex couples suffer under heteronormative superiority that just knew no bounds and no mercy. Now, these proposals were actually fairly easily defeated, but that just illustrates the length that some anti-gay Republican politicians were willing to go, and if given enough power, they would have gone much further because they just had that anti-gay passion. So ever since those days, if gay male partners are old enough to remember that time in history, which, wasn't all that long ago, nationwide marriage equality was not in place until 2015, just 10 years. So we've tried to think about how to protect ourselves against policy changes that happen on a local or a state or a national political level. The friendliness to LGBT people by governments all over the world can rise and fall. Lately, gay men have been concerned about losing legal rights, including marriage equality, in this new drastically anti-LGBT sentiment of the Trump Republican American fascist regime, and now the majority conservative Supreme Court, where certain members of the Supreme Court have made it their mission to destroy nationwide marriage equality as a goal. There's a case now in 2025 in Idaho that wants to go up to the Supreme Court to reverse nationwide marriage equality and leave it to the states. And this was a Trump and Republican campaign topic in 2024, and it's certainly part of Project 2025 that's being implemented. They said it wasn't going to be, but it's being very systematically implemented if you study it. So let's reflect. In light of this current political climate, really the world over, how secure do you feel about the legal protections afforded to your relationship? What proactive measures can you take to fortify the protections in your relationship? Let's talk about taking other legal precautions. So in addition to all of these, gay men might consider other ways to position themselves to the safest and most advantageous circumstances. Since gay men can often face discrimination or harassment in the workplace, keeping documentation that might help us in a case like this is pretty wise. So keeping copies of good performance reviews at work, or complimentary letters or emails sent to us by bosses or colleagues or clients or customers or peers in our field could help. Documenting the date and time and location and people involved in either good, complimentary, positive experiences, or documenting incidents or events of harassment or discrimination would be key to building your legal case, either as a plaintiff or as a defendant. I had a gay male client who was falsely accused of discriminating against another minority employee, and yet he had records of how he had advocated for and promoted and supported this employee during their long working relationship. I mentioned in a previous episode about how therapy can support a gay man going through the stress of a legal proceeding. I also had a previous episode about toxic woke, about legal protections in the workplace going too far and becoming so strict that some people have said, oh, gay white men are part of the problem. I think that's abhorrent, frankly, but you do have some people, even on the left, who are so extreme that they're getting into outrageous extremes against all white men in the workplace, including gay ones or Jewish ones or people with disabilities or other types of minority status. So somewhere in the middle is the sweet spot. But documenting things like professional trainings or the credentials you've earned, or job project successes, or your sales numbers, all of these can help if you're ever fired or demoted for trumped up reasons that you suspect are due to homophobia. And you need to defend your history of your good working record over time, the cumulative work record that shows that you were a good employee all this time. And if something bad is happening to you, is that the product of antipathy or discrimination? So knowing who your allies are in the workplace and in your family of origin and your friends is important. In the event of an emergency, note who would be kind of your inner circle, your kitchen cabinet of supportive people and advisors that would comprise what clinical social workers like me call your social support system. Let's reflect. Reflect on any instances where documentation or the lack thereof impacted a legal or a workplace situation. How can meticulous record keeping serve as a safeguard for you and your partner? Let's talk about taxes. Nobody likes the burden of federal and state and local taxes, but these are funds that help society function as a collective civilization. My friend and colleague, the great author Shelley Campbell, author of some great personal financial planning books like The Wealthy Spirit, one of my favorites, tells the story that other people's taxes go for buying tanks and weapons of war. My taxes go to fund the National Endowment for the Arts or aid for disaster victims. She likes to look at it that way. So even though we can't really designate or earmark our taxes paid for specific causes, it can be nice to cognitively reframe the burden of taxes in a more positive way, that we're giving money and supporting things that are important to us in our value system. But taxes, are a legal process, and our obligations are set by law, and that can change from time to time. The government can impose taxes in all kinds of ways: income, property, sales, vehicle, licenses, utilities, building permits, all of that. But we can also legally find ways to take legitimate deductions and limit the inconvenience and burden of taxes wherever possible. Learning about what can and cannot be done with taxes helps us to live within our means and always have the IRS and others off our backs. People who ignore their obligations in taxes are often the ones who end up having to pay extra attention to them. Cher tells stories in her recent autobiography, the first half of it anyway, when she and her then husband, Sonny Bono, were young and hit with sudden stardom and wealth as Sonny and Cher, only to see it fade with a big tax bill, before she became the wealthy superstar she's been for decades. But lots of young actors and other performers aren't literate in how to manage taxes from often very suddenly high incomes. But those legal and tax obligations remain. So let's reflect. Taxes are one of the most polarizing topics in politics, with some people voting for political candidates based on their stances on tax policy alone, from the left or the right. So in your value system, where do you stand? What values inform your position about politics and taxes? Let's talk about documents and their storage. Developing and creating all kinds of sound documents to protect yourself and your partner is important, but it's also important in how you store them. So I mentioned earlier about having a fireproof and watertight strong box at home designated for long-term secure storage of important documents, but doing other things like making copies of documents and having them stored off-site, as I said, is also important. And this could be at your attorney's office or a secured electronic cloud storage, maybe in a bank safety deposit box, or just off-site at a friend or relatives. I mentioned earlier a sibling, but maybe it's a close friend too. And that can bring extra peace of mind that you've documented proof of your wishes and legal status should you ever need them and not have access to your own copies. So legally, most documents are equally legitimate if they're copies or originals, but original wet signatures, not electronic, and notarization can help lend some extra status to those documents. So let's reflect. Where do you currently store your essential documents? How accessible would they be in an emergency? And what improvements can you think of that might be made to ensure their security and their availability, especially quickly in an emergency? Let's talk about balance. Taking the time to really protect and provide yourself sounds like a lot of work, but it gets easier if you take these items one at a time and discuss them in ways that make you and your partner feel heard and cared for. You balance the work of protecting yourself and your relationship administratively, and then you can put it all aside and go out and enjoy it everyday life. And while all these, dorky little details can be tedious, what you pay in tedium now pays off with long-term peace of mind. And taking care of these items shows that you have a robust self-esteem enough to provide for yourself, that you don't abandon yourself to complacency, but you are there for you because you feel like you are worth taking care of. And so is your partner and your relationship and your family. Protecting yourself through a series of legal documents and procedures lends respect and dignity to your life and your relationship. Doing these things, even if other people don't necessarily know about them, shows yourself and your partner or spouse that your relationship is just as good and legitimate and worthy of respect as anyone else's, particularly straight people's. It's symbolic of your commitment to each other, and it tells yourself and your partner and others that you matter in this world and that how you live is to be protected and treasured and valued. It's all part of a healthy self-esteem and adulting in the best ways possible. Let's reflect. After, hearing all of this, what emotions come up for you as you consider the legal aspects of your relationship? What steps can you take to address any feelings of overwhelm and move towards a proactive planning, to feel empowered and confident and optimistic that you're doing what you need to do to set yourself up for success? So if you need support for how to take care of yourself or your partner or your family in these and any other way, consider psychotherapy for California residents where I'm licensed, or coaching services for anywhere in the world. Therapists work on not just the intrapsychic, but also on the relational and the practical in life in lots of ways. And these are part of today's modern therapist functions. Taking care of yourself supports your self-esteem and self-agency and self-empowerment, all those self words, and can guard against the helplessness or the hopelessness of depression or the burden of anxiety, and supports a healthy nurturance of your relationship with yourself first and then others. So let me know if I can help you in that growth process, because you deserve nothing less. Call or text 310-339-5778, 310-339-5778, or email me, ken@gaytherapyla.com or ken@gaycoachingla.com for more information or to make an online appointment. So thanks, and I will see you next time.